3:41 UTC. A satellite hundreds of miles above the Indian Ocean logs a connection request. A digital whisper. Then, silence. A system built to never go quiet. Just did. For 80 seconds, the network recorded nothing. No coordinates, no trajectory, no reason. Was it interference? A hardware reset? Or something deliberately interrupted mid-transmission? When the next signal came through, it carried something off. A shift in frequency. A subtle distortion that analysts would later struggle to model, as if the transmitter itself had moved. It wasn't just a data anomaly. It was the first clue that reality itself, location, speed, altitude, was about to slip out of alignment. Only later would investigators realize this signal belonged to an aircraft, and that it was the last known handshake before one of the greatest disappearances in modern aviation. If you're still watching, you're part of the few who follow the trail, frame by frame, frequency by frequency. That's what we do here. We track the signals others stop mentioning. So stay close, subscribe, like, and share your own theory in the comments. Because sometimes it's the collective analysis that uncovers what the official reports overlook. Before the mystery, there was order. Before the silence, there was structure. Flight plans, frequencies, coordinates, all aligning like clockwork. March 2014. A routine red-eye service departs from one of Southeast Asia's busiest airports. A clear night. Flight plan logged. Fuel calculated. Estimated time of arrival. Just under 6 hours. Controllers watch it climb. Everything is nominal. The aircraft reaches cruising altitude, 35,000 feet, speed steady at Mach 0.84. A final routine handoff to the next control sector approaches. Good night, Malaysian 370. 2 minutes later, the transponder signal vanishes from secondary radar. No squawk, no follow-up call, just gone. Controllers assume a glitch. They wait. 2 minutes, 5, 10, nothing. At 17:25 UTC, the flight should have checked in with the next station. It doesn't. Instead, it begins to turn. First a shallow bank, then a deliberate arc. Heading southwest, toward a region of airspace shared uneasily between civil and military control. For the next hour, the plane drifts across multiple radar zones. Some pick it up. Others miss it entirely. A mosaic of incomplete returns paints a haunting picture. An aircraft alive on screens, yet unreachable by voice. And then, nothing. No communications, no beacon, no automatic distress transmission. But high above the atmosphere, something else was still listening. That satellite, part of the Inmarsat network, wasn't monitoring flights. It handled digital messages for everything from cargo ships to remote data relays. But on this night, it recorded something strange, a sequence of automated handshakes from an aircraft no one could see. 1707, 1825, 1941, 2041, 2241, 011, and finally, 019. Each a brief pulse, a mathematical fingerprint confirming a connection request. Each weaker than the last, each more distant. These became known as the Inmarsat arcs, a series of possible positions stretching thousands of kilometers across the southern hemisphere. They weren't coordinates in the traditional sense. They were echoes, lines of probability based on delay times and Doppler shifts. By morning, the plane's planned route no longer mattered. It had slipped off the grid of human tracking and onto the map of digital uncertainty. What began as a missing aircraft was becoming something else, a forensic chase through invisible signals, a mystery written in milliseconds and frequency drift. The world would soon learn its name and realize this wasn't just a loss of contact. It was the beginning of one of the strangest data puzzles in modern history. Imagine a conversation that never included words, just timing, frequency, and delay. That's the handshake. Every few minutes, an aircraft's satellite terminal checks in with the network above, confirming it's still connected, even when nothing is being transmitted. But on this night, those handshakes became the only voice left. The system was called the Satellite Data Unit, or SDU, an onboard modem linking the aircraft to a geostationary satellite known as Inmarsat 3F1. When powered, it sends a logon request. The satellite responds with a logon acknowledge, a two-way ping, a digital nod that confirms life in the system. At 0:19 UTC, the network recorded the last of these signals, a burst, then nothing. But here's the strange part. The handshake wasn't supposed to reveal where a plane was. It wasn't a tracker. It was a connectivity test. Yet, by analyzing the Doppler shift, the tiny frequency changes in those pings, engineers could estimate relative motion. Combine that with the burst timing offset, the delay between sending and receiving, and suddenly, each ping forms a geometric arc on the surface of the Earth. 6 arcs total. The final one, pointing into nothing but open water. But data doesn't lie, unless it's misunderstood. And what followed was one of the most ambitious reverse engineering efforts in aviation history. Teams modeled atmospheric drag, power cycles, even the temperature of the plane's electronics, all to explain why the 0:19 ping came at a slightly shifted frequency. Some said it was simple. The plane had entered a steep descent, altering the Doppler curve. Others argued it was a system reboot, the SDU powering back on after total loss of power. A third theory suggested something darker, that the aircraft's systems had been manually reset, triggering the handshake artificially. None of it fit perfectly. Each model explained part of the curve, but not all. The burst frequency offset at 0:19 still refused to align with any known scenario. What was this signal? A dying system's last breath? A power surge echo? Or evidence of motion no one accounted for? What began as an engineering tool had become forensic evidence. And for nearly a decade, these silent pings have spoken louder than any voice recorder ever could. Because in the absence of wreckage, this data is the aircraft. Every tone, every offset, every silence. A heartbeat in binary. And within that heartbeat, a pattern no one expected. A consistency that may point to a system or a hand.
Good night, Malaysia, 370.
7 words. No distress call. No sign of trouble. A perfectly normal handover. Seconds before the transponder vanished. Controllers expected the aircraft to check in with the next sector within 2 minutes. It never did. Behind that silence, 239 lives, 2 pilots, 10 crew, hundreds of passengers, sleeping, reading, unaware that the most advanced communication systems in the world were about to lose them completely. The captain's profile showed over 18,000 hours of flight experience, a veteran, a mentor, known for calm precision. The first officer, young but capable, finishing his final supervised flights. No evidence of distress in their voices, no coded words, no background anomalies on the recording. When the plane turned west, across the Malay Peninsula, no one on any frequency heard from the crew again. No mayday, no squawk code for emergency, not even a single key press. So what happened inside that cockpit between 1721 and 1825 UTC, the silent hour? Was it a gradual systems failure that isolated them? Or an intentional act? A flight manually rerouted while the world slept? Investigators later replayed every second of the final transmission. They isolated frequencies, checked tone profiles, even measured the slight inflections of breath in the captain's words. No sign of panic, no coded message, no interruption. And yet, after that moment, total radio silence. Even when military radar detected the turn, even when systems reconnected briefly with the satellite, no voice ever came back. In the world of aviation, silence is data. And in this case, that silence speaks louder than any signal. Because while systems can fail, voices don't just disappear. In the months that followed, the search for truth became a search for agreement. But agreement never came. Every group, official, independent, academic, saw the same numbers and drew different maps. The Inmarsat team proposed a clean model. The satellite handshakes formed arcs. Each arc marked possible positions. and by matching frequency shifts, they calculated motion, direction, and descent. Their conclusion? A southern trajectory ending deep in the Indian Ocean, far from land, far from any radar. But other investigators weren't convinced. Some called the model elegant, others a mathematical illusion. These pings were never designed for navigation. We're interpreting shadows, not positions. Critics noted that small shifts in assumed speed or altitude could move the final search area by hundreds of miles. And if the SDU rebooted mid-flight, as some evidence hinted, every derived arc could be offset entirely. Others pointed to the northern route hypothesis, that the plane's signal could theoretically align with airspace over Central Asia if interpreted differently. Unlikely, but not impossible. For years, independent analysts published conflicting models, each claiming to reconcile the same numbers that official reports had already closed. Some relied on physics, others on probability, a few on intuition. Then came the deeper fractures. When the first debris surfaced off the coast of Africa, confirming the aircraft's fate, it should have unified the data narrative. Instead, it split it wider. If debris drift matched the southern model, why were timing intervals inconsistent? If the descent was uncontrolled, why did fragments suggest a relatively stable breakup? Each answer introduced new contradiction, each expert a new certainty. Behind closed doors, even data investigators reportedly disagreed on how the last handshake behaved, whether it came from a powered system, a falling aircraft, or a rebooted transmitter. At some point, we stopped talking about the data, because every time we did, it changed the story. And that's when the conversation quietly ended. Public statements grew cautious, analyses paused. The raw data remained accessible, but interpretation stalled. The truth wasn't buried. It just became too complicated to agree on. Because if the numbers could mean anything, what if they meant something no one wanted to believe? For months, the ocean said nothing. No wreckage, no signal. Just silence, rolling endlessly from horizon to horizon. Then, more than a year later, something broke that silence. A piece of carbon fiber composite torn along one edge, its paint worn by salt. A part of a wing, small but unmistakable. It was the first confirmed link between the missing jet and the sea that had swallowed it. For investigators, it was proof. For families, closure. For analysts, it was a new puzzle. Because the damage told a strange story. The fragment's edges weren't shredded or melted. They were sheared, as if separated cleanly by pressure differentials, not by impact. And the trailing edge showed a peculiar abrasion, as though it had skimmed the surface before breaking free. Some analysts saw the impossible in those details. Signs that the aircraft might have descended under control, wings level until the very last second. Others dismissed it, a coincidence, an illusion of physics. But for a moment, the idea hung in the air. What if the final moments weren't chaos, but intentional? Months later, attention turned again, not to the ocean, but to the data. A group of engineers reanalyzed the raw Inmarsat satellite logs, the same handshakes everyone thought had been exhausted years earlier. But this time, they used something new. Recalibrations from later satellites that had refined Doppler error margins down to mere hertz. And there, hidden in the noise floor of the final signal, at 1937 UTC, they found an anomaly. A spike, faint but distinct, milliseconds long. At first it seemed like nothing, a random transmission artifact. But when modeled, it showed motion, a frequency shift suggesting either a final burst of thrust or an active system attempting to stabilize. That hesitation changed everything. It implied continuity, that at the exact moment of the final handshake, the aircraft wasn't tumbling uncontrolled. It was alive, even if only mechanically. One engineer described it as the blink before blackout. Another called it proof of coherence, the system's last lucid thought. If the data was right, something or someone guided it down, not a dive, not a breakup, a controlled descent into silence. But evidence never travels alone. The same recalibration that revealed the anomaly also nudged every data arc, slightly south, slightly west. Tiny deviations measured in milliseconds translated to hundreds of square miles of new uncertainty. The investigators stood at the edge of an irony. The closer they looked, the more the truth retreated. Years of search, billions in cost. And now, a single reinterpreted frequency threatened to rewrite it all. That last signal wasn't just data. It was a conversation between metal, power, and distance. And it may have spoken longer than anyone believed. Because even after a decade of searching, the final handshake still echoes. An unanswered call from somewhere between the known and the lost. 10 years, dozens of expeditions, thousands of hours of data, and still, no definitive answer. Every recovered fragment tells part of a story. Every transmission tells another. But the two don't quite meet. Somewhere between physics and probability lies the truth. And maybe that's where it will stay. For years, analysts trusted models that seemed unshakable. But every new layer of analysis, every reprocessed signal, every recalibrated satellite dataset has added complexity instead of clarity. The so-called final handshake still resists full explanation. If it represents a power reboot, then who or what initiated it? If it was an automated ping, then why the anomaly? And if the aircraft glided as debris evidence suggests, why did every emergency system stay silent until the end? These are not the questions of conspiracy. They are the questions of incomplete physics. A puzzle missing the one constant that makes the rest make sense. Because the deeper investigators went into the data, the more it behaved like something alive, shifting when observed, resisting final classification. Even the simplest metrics, velocity, altitude, Doppler, refused to settle into one coherent model. What if this isn't about failure or even disappearance? What if it's about our limits? What happens when technology outruns our ability to interpret it? For all our radar, satellites, and telemetry, one aircraft slipped into the blank spaces between systems. It's as if the network itself looked away for just long enough. And in that gap, something happened that the data cannot describe. Even today, the search grids remain archived, the seafloor scans unclassified, the signals preserved, raw, open, waiting. But the people who once decoded them, many have stopped talking. Some say it's fatigue, others futility, and a few that they've already seen what they needed to see. If the 019 signal really contained that final, impossible shift, then the story isn't over. It's paused, waiting for the next generation of analysts to reopen the file. And when they do, what will they find? A final act of control? A system's dying echo? Or a truth we've simply never had the tools to recognize? Until then, the ocean keeps its secret, and the data still whispers. If you've made it this far, you're part of the few who don't look away when the trail goes dark. That's what we do here. We follow signals others abandon. We decode what's left unsaid. So, subscribe and stay part of this investigation. Leave your thoughts, your theories, your questions below. Because somewhere between our analysis and yours, a piece of the truth might finally connect.